Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. Tainted Grail The Fall of Avalon is a brand new RPG that just entered in early access on Steam.
You must have had a pickaxe dropped on your head long before you came here.
I was really looking forward to playing this game, especially because we don't get first-person RPGs that often nowadays. Yeah, Tainted Grail is a first-person RPG, and it has a lot of Skyrim vibes. Not just because you get to play the game in this camera perspective, a lot of aspects of this game were obviously heavily inspired by the Elder Scrolls franchise. There seems to be some Kingdom Come Deliverance inspiration as well, but I would say it mostly reminded me of Skyrim for the most part.
I'll make you pay for that!
Come to think of it, we don't really get to see Skyrim-inspired games that much nowadays. It's all about Souls-like RPGs, so it's kinda refreshing to see a game like this. First-person RPGs have a lot of technical limitations by default, and Tainted Grail is no different. This is the main reason why I personally prefer third-person camera perspective in RPGs with action combat systems. On the other side, first-person perspective can offer the player a much stronger immersive experience, and if you value that more than action gameplay, you're probably going to like Tainted Grail. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Since Tainted Grail is in early access, let's start the discussion by talking about the performance and the technical state of the game in general.
Whoa, what's happening?
The performance of this game is not great, to put it lightly. I was struggling with the frame rate when exploring the open world quite a bit. That definitely affected my enjoyment of the game, but I kinda expected this to happen considering the early access tag. So I can't really judge the optimization that harshly, but I played a bunch of early access titles with far less performance issues. I tried to tweak my graphical settings to boost my FPS, but it doesn't seem to matter what I select. I still couldn't reach that steady 60 FPS mark in the open world, so the gameplay never really felt smooth in the open world. The framerate is not the only issue I had. Microstutters are even more annoying, and unfortunately they are quite frequent.
Show yourself!
I can tolerate a low unstable frame rate, but stuttering can really piss me off in games because it ruins the experience, especially in combat. Tainted Grail has a lot of indoor instant areas with loading screens, just like the Elder Scrolls games. And speaking about load times, this is literally the last feature from Skyrim that I would like to see in more games. It's more of a technical limitation than anything else, and I like to believe they had to do it for technical reasons. Yeah, all of the closed areas are instants with a load screen, just like in Bethesda games. Whatever the case might be for this design decision, the performance is way better in those closed areas. I actually didn't have any issues with the frame rate and stuttering. Although the loading screens are pretty long, which is weird because I installed the game on one of the fastest SSDs that money can buy. I hope to see a major patch that will address these issues in the open world, as well as the loading screens. And you'll find some other minor issues like bad NPC pathfinding, placeholder voice setting for some dialogue lines and stuff like that. To sum it up, it's not hard to tell that you're playing an early access game. None of those issues are unfixable, and if you're checking out this video after some major patch, this section might be obsolete.
Don't look at me like that. You don't get as far in life as I have if you can't smell bullshit from a mile away.
Speaking about the open world, you don't get to explore the full map in the early access version. When it comes to visuals, I don't have a lot of issues with how the game looks. It's obviously a lower budget game, and that's reflected in the visual design departments. Mainly when it comes to lack of unique human character models, which is a widespread problem with lower budget RPGs. Now, I'm pretty sure the game looks at least a bit better than what you can see in this video, because I had to redo some details to normal because of the frame rate. The best part about the visuals is the open world and the things you're going to see while exploring the map. This game does a great job with environmental storytelling as well. You're going to notice this from the very beginning, and it continues throughout the game. You can tell that this studio really cares about small visual details, which are supposed to make the game world feel lived in. If you want to learn more about the lore and what's happening in this place, you absolutely can. You'll find a lot of written notes that can give you more context about what happened in the area you're exploring, or about some NPCs. I also like the simple armor and weapon design and the visual progression of your character in general. Although I would really like to have a simple option to at least see my character in third person outside of the menu. Overall, the game doesn't look amazing, but like I said, I don't have a lot of problems with the visuals. It's good enough for me to enjoy the game, but you be the judge. Just don't expect a AAA graphics and animations, obviously. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the game itself, shall we?
Who goes there? Are you the one responsible for all that racket? People here are trying to rest in peace, damn it.
Tainted Grail has an interesting premise. It's set in a fantasy world of King Arthur, and the cutscene at the beginning does a good job at telling you the basics of this universe. Essentially, there is a plague called the Red Death, which is ravaging the lands of Avalon. King Arthur and Merlin have already managed to stop this event in the past, but that was like 600 years ago. The Red Death is back, and it also brought back the weirdness. Yeah, I'm not making that up, the event is actually called the Weirdness.
A man here that would explain the weirdness surrounding us.
You'll discover these anomalies on the map, and somehow this entity is related to the player character. One of the main quests in the game is to find these places and learn more about the weirdness. These events are very hard to miss, and you'll see them on the map from a distance. But you also have quest marks as well, which kinda felt pointless because the map is not that big. Well, the map in early access at least, but still. I think they could totally get away with no quest marks on this map, but I understand why they felt the need to include it. Anyway, you start the game in the prison because of course you do, and you quickly get rescued by a guy named Caradoc. This game has a nice little tutorial island where the game teaches you everything you need to know. It's not a tedious, unnecessary stretched out tutorial, so it's a plus in my book. Anyway, before you leave the island, Caradoc tells you that your main mission is to steal Excalibur and kill King Arthur. Yeah, King Arthur apparently gets resurrected every now and then when things go south.
You're insane.
Besides the player character, Caradoc saved these two people as well. You three are supposed to help him with this important mission because you've been selected for some reason. But as soon as you decide to leave the island, you get in a shipwreck and you lose the track of these characters. The game opens up after this happens and you're free to explore the island. Meanwhile, every time you get to interact with the weirdness, you discover something new about this strange entity and how it's connected to your character. Besides main quests, you'll find some side quests here and there, and they're usually very simple. To sum up the main story, I think it's pretty good. It's interesting and I wanted to learn more about what's going on in general. The writing is decent, and every time you get to talk with someone there is a lot of options. You'll find skill checks as well, and it seems like the game offers you some actual choices, although I can't really confirm how impactful those decisions are. I decided to piss off as many people as possible because it seems fun.
A man is raising an army of the undead in the local cemetery, and you think he's harmless?
The voice acting is surprisingly good, although the game seems to have a handful of voice actors in total.
All mother's tits. I've just about had it with this bunch of repressed virgins.
You're going to recognize the voice of the same guy over and over again, but I don't think this is a huge issue. Especially because you're not going to get bombarded with a ton of NPCs around every corner. Actually you will, but you're not going to talk with them a lot. Instead, they're going to try and taunt you with some pretty weak one-liners, Monty Python and some Skyrim references. It's pretty hilarious.
'Tis but a scratch. 'Tis just a flesh wound.
Overall, I enjoyed the main story and I'm looking forward to learn more about it in the future. Some side quests are more interesting than others, but they are not really that good, especially compared to the main story. On the other side, the exploration is very good, and you're going to do most of the side quests by just, well, exploring and killing things. Which brings us to the meat of the game, the gameplay. I think the gameplay is a hit and miss, but there is a lot of room for improvement. First of all, there is a character creation menu, which is pretty basic with just a few options. But I don't think it matters a lot, since you're only going to see your character in the menu. The general gameplay of exploration and interacting with the world is pretty good, although the world itself can feel a bit dead, mainly because of the one-dimensional AI. NPCs don't do much, especially human enemy NPCs. They just stand around in one place awkwardly and wait for you to kill them, and sometimes they will bug out and not react at all. Friendly NPCs are not so different, they just hang around in one place, they don't seem to have any NPC schedules or anything interesting like that. This hurts the immersion a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. There are just a couple of areas on the map with multiple friendly NPCs and pretty much everything else wants to kill you. The map is filled with bandits and some creatures here and there. You will learn very fast that you shouldn't try to kill everything you see before you get a bit stronger, but you can still explore the map with no big issues. That's because the aggro range on enemies is very short, which allows you to explore the map without getting killed after every step you take. But this is mostly the case in the very beginning. As soon as you get some gear, the game becomes a lot easier. I'm not sure about the level of enemies, but they seem to have static levels with no level scaling, which is actually what I prefer in RPGs in general. Shortly after I started exploring, I found a very strong NPC that could easily one-shot me, and I quickly gave up on this fight. This aspect of progression feels very nice, and the game has a decent itemization system. Items are categorized with different colors, and I like when NPCs actually drop the things they are using, like armor and weapons. It makes you a bit excited about the loot after you kill the enemy. The UI is simple and clean, and I think it's well designed. When it comes to skills that you can learn, the game is a bit disappointing, but before we continue this discussion, we need to talk about the combat itself. Tainted Grail has a pretty simple action combat system. You can attack, evade, block and parry, and hold the attack button for a stronger attack. The game also has a stealth system, ranged weapons like bows, and some simple magic spells. But it seems like the melee combat is something you will have to focus on, and these other options are more like utility rather than actual playstyles. The melee combat is not that great for a couple of reasons. First of all, it feels like you're fighting in slow motion, which is a bit ironic because there is an actual slow motion mechanic as well, although I never used it that much. I get the reason behind the slower paced action. They wanted to telegraph the enemy attacks in the best way possible so you can react properly. Another reason for slow paced action combat would be to encourage the player to be more tactical and think about the next attack. Tainted Grail has some of that to some extent. You need to keep in mind your positioning, evade or parry attacks and your stamina. Although when you get stronger gear, you can kill most enemies without worrying about that, but that's perfectly fine. The problem is when the game tries to challenge you with stronger fights. You're mostly going to fight multiple enemies at once, and that's the game's idea of increased difficulty. One-on-one fights are pretty rare and quite underwhelming, like this ogre for example. You just evade to the side or behind his back and smack him once, wait for him to attack and repeat until he's dead. I mean, it works well enough and you can die if you're not careful with your evades, but it's just not that fun. Yeah, I know I said before that some enemies can basically one-shot you in the beginning, but that's mostly because you don't have any gear. As soon as you equip yourself with anything that can prevent this, one-on-one fights become a complete joke. Stronger NPCs have some unique moves that can be harder to evade, and they will also use evade as well. Although this doesn't feel that good since they usually go off screen, which is not fun. This could almost never happen in third-person perspective. For the most part, it feels like you're fighting enemies underwater, because the animation speed is very slow. The lack of impact on hits is another reason why the combat doesn't feel that good. It feels the same when you hit an enemy with a light weapon or a big two-handed sword. There are some things to like about the core of this action combat. The hitboxes seem precise and the parry is fun to pull off. The range combat feels decent, as well as the magic spells, but I only got to use a handful of them. It's still technically possible to try and focus on that playstyle, but only if you like to run a lot from enemies. The simple nature of this action combat system wouldn't be a big problem if the game offered you some interesting options to build and play your character. Unfortunately, Tainted Grail has some very boring passive skills that you can unlock as you level up. There are literally no active skills that you can learn, which is very disappointing. I mean, don't get me wrong, these skills are very useful, but the lack of active skills makes the progression very boring. The game has proficiencies, which will increase upon use. I like this a lot actually, but it doesn't seem to be a big factor in this early access version. The full effect of this system will probably be much greater in the release version when your character gains a lot of levels, which could offset the boring skill progression in the game. Like I said before, there are things to like about the progression system. It's fun to get new gear pieces, and it's very noticeable when your character gets a bit stronger because of that. The visual progression is very nice, and I like how the armor and weapons look. It gives me some Kingdom Come Deliverance vibes or something very similar to that. To some of the combat, it could be a lot better, and I hope to see at least some improvements in the final version.
Alright,
True.
I would still play the complete version of the game despite all the problems I mentioned. This is just a smaller sample of the game that I'm judging here, so keep that in mind as well. Although the progression system seems complete, judging by the menu at least. The last thing I want to mention before we get to the conclusion is the soundtrack. It's pretty cool but very repetitive and short. I like the ambient sounds as well, they put you in a certain mood while exploring, but the game definitely needs more soundtracks.
This is how it's done. What a whip!
To sum up the whole thing, Tainted Grail The Fall of Avalon could turn out to be a pretty decent game. However, in its current state, I would only recommend this game to people who really love first-person RPGs. The exploration is pretty good, the game has some legit RPG features, and the story keeps your attention.
Oh, mother's tits.
If you can tolerate all the problems I mentioned about the combat, you could have some fun with the early access version, but I really recommend waiting for some patches at least. Or you could always wait for the full game to be released and then decide. The early access offers you around 10 hours of gameplay if you want to see everything. I'm not so sure about the price of the game though, but if it's around 20 to 30 bucks, I think that would be fair for the complete version. Anyway guys, that would be it for this review. Tell me what you think about Tainted Grail in the comments below. Will you pick it up or not? Let me know. Don't forget to like the video, and subscribing would mean a lot. If you want to go a step further, you can always support me on Patreon or as a YouTube member. Many thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.